She didn't even try to lower her voice. Lisa stood on the balcony of our apartment in Austin, barefoot, one hand resting on the railing, the other holding her phone tight against her ear. The city was spread out behind her in glass and headlights, warm evening air moving through the open door. I had just made the coffee she asked for. 5 minutes earlier, she had called from the balcony like nothing was wrong. "Can you bring me a cup?" So I did. I was standing in the doorway when she said, clear as day, "Do whatever you want." Then she paused. Her voice dropped, but not enough. "I don't care if he finds out." I stopped with the mug in my hand. She turned then, saw me. For 1 second, her face went still. Not afraid. Not sorry. Just caught. I waited for her to explain. She didn't. She took the coffee from my hand, looked past me toward the city, and turned back to the balcony. That was the moment I understood something had already broken. Not cracked. Broken. And I was only just hearing the sound. Before that evening, everything looked normal. Not perfect, just steady. The kind of steady you stop questioning after a while. We had been together almost 8 years. Long enough to build routines that didn't need explanation. Long enough to believe silence wasn't distance. It was comfort. We moved to Austin for her job. That was her opportunity, her step forward. I adjusted without much thought. Found work, learned the city, let her set the pace. It felt like the right thing to do at the time. She worked at a consulting firm downtown. Long hours, shifting deadlines, constant pressure. I got used to it. Late dinners, rescheduled plans, conversations that started halfway through and ended early. I supported her where I could. Sat with her while she ran through presentations. Listened to her rehearse the same points until her voice smoothed out. Sometimes I caught mistakes. Most of the time, I just made sure she wasn't doing it alone. At home, things stayed quiet. We'd eat, sometimes watch something neither of us was really paying attention to, sometimes just sit there. Phones in our hands. Not talking, not arguing either. It didn't feel wrong. Just muted. There were small things. Easy to ignore on their own. Her phone started staying face down on the table. She began taking calls in the other room, saying it was easier to hear. She laughed at messages she didn't share. I noticed all of it, but I explained it away just as quickly. Work stress, deadlines, office politics, the kind of pressure that changes how people move without changing who they are. That's what I told myself. Even when she started coming home later. Even when weekends stopped feeling like time together and started feeling like recovery periods for her. I didn't connect anything. I didn't want to. Because as long as everything still looked normal, I didn't have to question what we had. And I didn't realize that by the time something shows on the surface, it's usually been happening underneath for a while. After that evening, I stopped asking questions. Not out loud, at least. There's a point where conversation stops being useful, where every answer feels prepared, shaped to keep things moving without actually saying anything. I could feel that shift, even if I hadn't named it yet. So I changed how I paid attention. I stopped looking for explanations and started noticing patterns. The way she held her phone changed first. Not just face down anymore. Angled slightly away, like she was aware of where I was in the room without looking at me. Her thumb moved faster when she typed, more deliberate. Like the conversation mattered. She smiled more, but not at me. It was subtle. A small lift at the corner of her mouth, eyes narrowing slightly at the screen. The kind of expression that used to show up when we shared something. Now it happened in silence. Her schedule stretched in ways that didn't quite line up. Late meetings without context. Vague explanations. Just busy became a complete sentence. At first, I tried to map it out in my head. Which days she stayed late. How often. Whether there was a rhythm to it. There was. Same days. Same general time frame. Same tone when she mentioned it. Light, dismissive. Already moving past the subject before I could follow it. I stopped interrupting. Stopped asking what she was working on. Stopped offering help. Instead, I listened to how she said things. There's a difference between being busy and sounding busy. I started to hear it. Her voice would shift slightly when she said she couldn't talk. Softer, but not tired. Controlled. Like she was managing 2 conversations at once. I didn't confront her. Didn't accuse. Because at that point, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was observing. And once you start seeing things as patterns instead of moments, it gets harder to convince yourself they're random. It stopped feeling like something that might be happening, and started feeling like something already in motion. I just hadn't caught up to it yet. I didn't make a scene, didn't confront her, didn't test her with questions designed to trip her up. By then, I understood something simple. If there was something to find, it wouldn't come out in conversation. It would be sitting somewhere, waiting. One night, she fell asleep earlier than usual. Her phone was on the nightstand, screen dark, within reach. For a moment, I considered it. Not out of panic, just out of curiosity. But I left it there. Instead, I walked into the other room and opened her laptop. No hesitation. No second thoughts. It wasn't hidden. No passwords beyond what I already knew. No folders disguised as something else. Everything was right where it always had been. That was the first thing that stood out. There was no effort to conceal anything. I opened her messages. Scrolled slowly. Names I recognized. Co-workers. Group chats. Threads about work. Deadlines. Small complaints about clients. Normal things. Then I saw his name. Mark. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. I had heard it before. In passing. Someone from the team. Nothing specific enough to remember. Just enough to feel familiar. Their messages didn't stand out at first. Short exchanges. Light tone. Jokes that didn't need explanation between them. Plans that sounded casual. Running late again. Same. Want to grab something after? Yeah. Nothing explicit. Nothing dramatic. That was the second thing that stood out. It all looked ordinary. I kept reading. Days stacked on top of each other. Same rhythm. Same timing I had started noticing without proof. Then I saw it. One line, buried in the middle of everything else. Do whatever you want. I didn't need context. I had already heard the rest. I don't care if he finds out. Same wording. Same tone. I closed the laptop without scrolling further. There wasn't anything left to confirm. No rush of anger. No need to read more. Because at that point, I wasn't trying to understand what they were. I understood what we weren't. And in that moment, something shifted quietly. Not outwardly. Nothing visible. But internally, I stopped trying to fix anything. Stopped looking for a version of her that would explain it away. What was in front of me was enough. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to save it. I was thinking about what came next. After that, I didn't change anything on the surface. That was important. I still asked how her day was. Still made coffee in the morning. Still sat across from her in the evenings like nothing had shifted. If she noticed a difference, she didn't show it. And that told me something too. She believed the version of me she had already adjusted to. Predictable. Available. On her side. So I stayed there. But I started paying attention to details I used to ignore. Not just her behavior, her routines. The way she prepared for things. There was a presentation coming up. A big one. Chicago client. She had mentioned it weeks earlier, but now it was close enough to feel real. I could see it in how she moved. More focused. Slightly tense. She brought her laptop to the kitchen table again, something she hadn't done in a while. Slides open, notes scattered, the same method she always used when something mattered. She asked me to look at it. That didn't surprise me. It had always been part of our routine. I reviewed, she adjusted. I pointed out small inconsistencies, she refined them. It was practical, efficient, and she trusted me with it. That was the part that stayed consistent. Even now, I sat there and went through each slide like I always did. Structure, timing, flow. I knew her patterns well enough to anticipate where she would rush, where she would over-explain. I made notes, kept my tone neutral, focused on the work itself. She listened, took it seriously, nodded at the right points. There was no hesitation, no sense that anything between us had changed in a way that affected this. And that created a strange kind of distance. Because I could see both versions of her at the same time. The one sitting across from me, relying on me like she always had. And the one from the messages. The balcony. The pattern I couldn't ignore anymore. They didn't overlap. They ran in parallel. She repeated the same habits over the next few days. Same late hours. Same explanations. Same quiet confidence that everything was under control. There was something steady about it. Almost calming. Not because it was right, but because it was consistent. Like everything had already been decided. Nothing new was being created. It was just continuing. And I stopped thinking about whether it would change. I started thinking about how it would end. Her presentation wasn't just another task. It was the kind of opportunity that changes trajectory. A multi-million-dollar contract, senior leadership involved, visibility across the firm. She had been building toward it for weeks, maybe months before that. I knew every slide. Not just the content, but the intention behind each one. where she wanted to pause, where she planned to emphasize numbers, where she expected questions. She practiced in the living room 2 nights before the call, stood near the window, laptop open, speaking to an empty room like it was already happening. Her voice steady, measured, controlled. I sat on the couch, listening the same way I always had. Occasionally I stopped her, adjusted wording, suggested she simplify a section that felt too dense, reminded her to slow down where the data mattered more than the explanation. She made the changes without resistance, trusted the process, trusted me. That was the part that stayed consistent, even now. And that's what made everything else feel separate. Because this wasn't just about us anymore. Up until then, whatever was happening existed within the apartment, within routines we had built together. Private space, private consequences. This was different. This presentation carried weight outside of that. Clients, revenue, reputation. People who didn't know anything about our life would be affected by how this went. I understood that clearly. I also understood something else. There's a point where personal decisions stop being contained, where they start intersecting with everything else a person depends on. She didn't see that line. Or maybe she did, and assumed it wouldn't matter. The night before the presentation, she seemed calmer than I expected. Less nervous, more certain. She reviewed the slides one last time, closed the laptop, and set it aside like the outcome was already decided. We didn't talk much after that. Just routine things. Dinner, dishes, quiet. At some point, she checked her phone and smiled. Brief. Controlled. Then it was gone. I noticed it, the same way I noticed everything now. But I didn't react. Because by then, I wasn't trying to understand her choices. I was watching how far they would carry, and whether she realized what they were connected to. By the time she went to bed, everything was already in place. Not just for the presentation, for what came after it. She just didn't know that yet. She called me 3 times. I watched the phone light up on the kitchen counter, her name appearing and disappearing in short intervals, like she expected I might pick up if she just tried again quickly enough. I didn't answer. By the 4th call, she stopped. The apartment was quiet. Late afternoon light coming through the windows, same as any other day. Nothing outside suggested anything had changed. But something had. She came home earlier than usual. The door opened faster than normal. Keys dropped on the counter without care. I could hear it in the way she moved. Uncontrolled, uneven. Not the measured pace she kept when everything was fine. I stayed where I was. She walked into the living room, still holding her phone, her expression unsettled in a way I hadn't seen before. Something's wrong, she said quickly, like she was trying to get ahead of it. My files, there was an issue. The presentation didn't load right. Some of the data was missing, some slides were out of order. She kept talking. The clients noticed. They asked questions I couldn't answer because the numbers didn't match. It didn't make sense. I checked everything last night. I didn't interrupt. She paced once, then stopped, looking at me like she expected something. Questions, maybe reassurance, maybe confusion. They walked out, she said, quieter now. Midway through, my manager pulled me aside right after. HR was there. A pause. I'm fired. The word sat there between us. She let out a breath, like she had been holding it since she walked in. I don't understand how this happened, she added. I went over everything. You saw it. It was fine. I nodded slightly. It was. That seemed to catch her off guard. For a second, she studied my face, like she was trying to place something that didn't fit. I held her gaze, steady. Then I said, without raising my voice, I gave you everything. She frowned, confused. What does that have to do with this? I didn't answer right away. I let the silence settle, long enough for her to sit with it. Then I repeated it. I gave you everything. This time, something shifted in her expression. Not fully understanding. Not yet. But recognition. Like a connection forming too late to be useful. She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. Because whatever she was about to say wouldn't change what had already happened. And for the first time, she didn't have control over the direction of the conversation. Not that it mattered anymore. By then, the outcome wasn't something either of us could adjust. After that, things moved without me. Not immediately. Not all at once. But in a way that didn't require my involvement anymore. She stayed in the apartment that night, moving between rooms like she was trying to find a version of the day that made sense. Phone calls, short and tense. Messages sent, then deleted, then sent again. I didn't ask who she was talking to. I already knew who wasn't answering. Mark stopped replying. That part became clear by the second day. I could see it in how often she checked her phone. The pauses getting longer. The frustration turning into something quieter. Not anger, confusion. Like she expected consistency from something that was never stable to begin with. Her job was gone. That reality settled in slowly. First, the calls. Then the emails. Then the silence. No follow-up. No reconsideration. Just distance. She tried to explain it to herself out loud. Blamed the system. The files. The timing. Circumstances that felt easier to accept than the idea that something had already been set in motion. I didn't correct her. Didn't offer an alternative explanation. Because at that point, explanations weren't useful. Only outcomes. I started packing the next morning. Not everything. Just what was mine. Clothes. Documents. A few tools. Things that had a clear place outside of that apartment. I moved through it quietly. No sudden decisions. No hesitation either. Each item was either necessary or it wasn't. She noticed eventually. Stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching without stepping in. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her voice was different now. Less certain. I folded a shirt, placed it in the suitcase, zipped a smaller bag. Leaving. The word didn't carry anything extra. No emphasis. No explanation. She stayed there for a moment, like she was waiting for something more. An argument. A discussion. A reason she could respond to. I didn't give her one. Because there wasn't anything left to work through. What had happened didn't need interpretation anymore. It had already unfolded. And everything after that was just reaction. She stepped back eventually. Didn't try to stop me. Didn't ask where I was going. Maybe because she understood, at some level, that those questions didn't matter anymore. By the time I closed the suitcase, the apartment felt unfamiliar. Not because it had changed, but because whatever connected me to it had already been gone for a while. I was just the last one to leave. I left in the morning. Not early. Not late. Just at the point where the day had already started, but nothing important had happened yet. The kind of time that doesn't leave an impression. The suitcase rolled behind me across the floor, quiet except for the wheels catching slightly at the doorway. I didn't rush. There was no reason to. She was in the living room. Same spot as the night before, sitting on the edge of the couch, phone in her hand, but not using it. She looked up when I stepped out, like she had been waiting for that moment without knowing what to say when it came. I didn't stop. Not because I was avoiding anything, but because there wasn't anything left to address. At the door, I paused just long enough to check I had everything I needed. Wallet, keys, phone, simple things. The kind that matter when everything else has already been decided. Behind me, she shifted slightly. "Are you really leaving?" she asked. The question sounded smaller than I expected. Not confrontational. Not defensive. Just uncertain. I turned halfway, enough to acknowledge it. "I already did," I said. She didn't respond. And I didn't wait for her to. I opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and pulled it closed behind me without looking back. The sound was soft. Controlled. Nothing like the kind of ending people imagine. No raised voices. No final argument. Just a quiet separation between what had been and what was already over. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Not because of hesitation, but because it gave me time to recognize something clearly. What I was walking away from hadn't ended that morning. It had ended on the balcony. Everything after that had just been confirmation. By the time I stepped outside, the air felt different. Not lighter. Not heavier. Just separate. Like I had moved out of something without needing to carry it with me. I put the suitcase in the trunk, closed it, and stood there for a second longer than necessary. Not thinking about her. Not replaying anything. Just adjusting to the absence of something that had already been gone. Then I got in the car and drove away. I don't think about it much now. Not in the way people expect. There's no replaying conversations. No wondering what I could have done differently. That kind of thinking assumes there was something left to fix. There wasn't. Some things don't break all at once. They shift slowly, quietly, until one moment makes it visible. The balcony wasn't the start. It was just the point where I finally saw it clearly. After that, everything followed its own direction. I didn't need to push it. Didn't need to explain it. I just stepped out of it. And what was left behind stayed there, exactly where it belonged. Not unresolved. Just finished. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.